up, guys? Coach Peters here. Today I want to talk about the RDL, or Romanian deadlift, or straight leg deadlift, however you want to call it. Essentially what we're looking here is to train the backside or posterior chain of your body, right? The squats and lower body pushing tend to be quad dominant and front side dominant, so we use RDLs primarily as a way to train that back half of the body. This can help establish imbalances that some people have in the knee, right? That quad dominance can create weird tracking of your patella. We can also create a lot of tension in that low and lumbar back, right? If we don't have the strength to bend over and use our glutes and hamstrings, then that low back tends to take over, and that's when we slip a disc, we have some problems down the road. So this RDL progressions and regressions from this core movement is really going to help you guys to stabilize that lower half. Additionally, from an athletic position, from an athletic standpoint, this is your run and jump muscles, right? If we want to create or translate that vertical force in the squat pattern and in vertical jumping into horizontal movement, athletic movement, being able to cut and extend, we need to be able to translate force down the backside and also from one leg to the other. So the RDL is a really great way to do that. So our RDL setup begins with our feet directly under our hips. It's not like a squat where we're out wide. We want directly under, toes pointed straight ahead. We want to create that linear sprint and jump stance just like we would. So we want to train it just like we're going to use it. So feet are in line. Step one, shoulders down and back, big chest, abs tight. Now understand, when we say shoulders down and back, big chest, we don't want to get into that hyperextended, exaggerated low back arch. That's going to later create just as many problems as this will. We want a stiff, stable, braced spine. So shoulders down and back, big chest, abs tight means rib cage down, and we want to stabilize that spine just like we do in our brace. From there, that's our step one, right? Set your torso. Step two, hinge at the knees. That is it. Don't overcomplicate it. 1, 2. Shoulders don't go anywhere. All we're doing is sitting the hips just a little bit, breaking at the knees. From there, we get into our actual movement. I want to sit my hips and my knees backwards, and I'm going to let my chest naturally drop to the ground. Now understand, once we set our torso and we set our knees, those aren't moving, right? All movement now comes from the hips. It's what we call a hip dominant movement, right? This is a hip hinge. Shoulders stay in place, torso stays in place, knees stay in place, and we work right back to there. So now we've taught the RDL and it's time to train it. We want to talk about a few regressions because not everybody first time through can get it. It can be a very difficult movement to learn, understanding that we're separating the hips from the knees and the torso, right? We're not bending over like this. We're not squatting down, right? We want to hinge at the hips. So to teach that movement can sometimes be a little bit difficult. So to do that, our first one's going to be with a dowel. You can also use just a wall, right? That'll work too. But the dowel can be a little easy because it's movable. It moves with me. But first off, we just get our feet just like normal. Feet underneath our hips, toes straight ahead. Hands out at eye height. And you want that dowel vertical right out in front of you. From there, we're going to go through our steps just like normal. Shoulders down and back, big chest, abs tight, hinge at the knees. Now I'm going to sit my butt back while at the same time pushing that dowel away from me. And the dowel helps you to keep your chest up and your back flat. That's the reason why we use this. Instead of some people, typically, we get here and then all of a sudden we just drop forward. That dowel can help you to keep that torso upright a little bit more and help you to maintain that flat back so that we are emphasizing the hips. The next progression I like to use while teaching the RDL, or just the hip hinge in general, is the landmine. The reason I like to do this is because it actually pushes back at me. It'll push me into the right position. If I'm sitting forward into it, maybe using my knees a little too much, or if I'm leaning and rounding with my back, it's not going to let me go there. So our setup's the same. We got our feet in the right position. We start with the barbell at our hips, shoulders down and back, big chest abs tight, hinge at the knee. From here, we drop those knees and hips backwards. The chest naturally drops. Now, as you see, the bar pushes me back as I go down. So that's why it likes to push me into the right position. Again, we have to manage our torso, keep that back flat, manage your knees. We want to make sure all the work is coming from our hips. Another progression I like to use late in teaching, or maybe for rehab athletes coming back from a knee or hip injury, is a single leg reach back. And there's different ways to progress this, but essentially we're going to be getting into the same position on one leg. So what we'll get the same setup as normal. Step one, shoulders. Step two, hinge at the knees. Then I'm going to reach one leg back as far as I can. Try and touch the ground with my toe and right back up. In doing so, my chest will naturally drop. As I reach, I don't want to sink at the hips, right? It's not a squat, so I'm reaching back. You'll notice most of the work's going to come from the hip, and I'll come right back up. So that again is another way to teach this hip hinge, especially if we want to start loading that hip again. If somebody's coming back from an injury and they don't like to do that, or maybe if we want to start getting into that single leg progression. So this is a good way to introduce it. Our first resisted progression of the RDL is a banded pull through. Setup is the same. Only now the band adds resistance on the way back up, emphasizing use of the glutes and hamstrings. This additionally helps us in sitting back in the movement. We must get our hips and knees backwards and not just sink straight down to the ground. And the band helps us get to that position. Next is our dumbbell RDL. This allows us to add a little weight to the movement while still emphasizing our early fundamentals. Be sure to keep those shoulders down and back, nice and tight. That weight's going to start pulling out away in front, and we got to keep it tight to the body. Finally, we add the barbell. Be sure to emphasize shoulders down and back the entire movement, and knees and hips working backward. The weight should be flat on our midfoot, maybe a little more on the heels, and the eyes should be pointed down, keeping a neutral neck. Be sure to activate those lats, pulling the bar towards the legs. The bar should slide up and down your legs. If it gets out away from you, we know we're losing our balance and getting forward. Once we've shored up some of the fundamental RDL movements, we can progress to the more difficult single leg patterns. Here, we want to emphasize our post leg, the leg on the ground, maintains the exact same movements as a regular RDL. Knee with a slight hinge. Other than that, all movement comes from the hip. That glute and hamstring is going to be doing most of the work. From there, we want to make sure that our torso stays nice and tight, shoulders are down and back. We don't want to reach with that dumbbell. It shouldn't go too low. Lastly, that swing leg is long and locked throughout the entire movement. We should create a straight line from our top of our head to the bottom of that heel, while keeping that toe pointed straight down to the ground and our hips square. The same concept applies with a barbell single leg RDL. I want to continue to place emphasis on the torso, making sure not to reach with those arms on this exercise. It really doesn't matter how far down the bar goes, as long as we keep our torso tight. Our depth goal should be a horizontal torso. From the top of our head to our heel should be a straight line horizontally. Again, that's dependent upon the athlete or the client and their mobility. Finally, we can progress to a kettlebell or a dumbbell swing. Now, the reason this is a progression is because it's moving at speed. So we want to make sure before we dive into these, have your RDL movement pattern dialed in because we are moving with a little bit more speed and we need to make sure that we can control it and stay safe. But ultimately, the same is true, right? Keep our back flat, keep those knees hinged, and maximize use of the hips.